My name is Brayden Sutherland. My pronouns are he, him, and my degree has recently changed to a dual honors in history and religion. And today we're talking about my research paper on gendered experience in the heavy metal music community. Growing up, my dad was really into bands like Iron Maiden, Seether, Dio, those kind of stuff. So I grew up listening to it. I've been to quite a few metal bands with my dad. So I was really excited to do this research on this community that I've been a part of for a while. Once I got into it and I started seeing like bands I know and singers I've listened to, in the research I was doing, it felt a lot more personal. I've only been to two heavy metal concerts. I've seen 9 or 10 bands in person, but only a couple of them have been metal. Bullet for My Valentine, Avenged Sevenfold, Breaking Benjamin, and then Raven Age and Iron Maiden. Those are the metal bands I've seen in concert. They were all really cool. I actually ended up using the Iron Maiden concert in my presentation in Chicago because I had a woman approach me asking for assistance. She was trying to snort a line and I guess she couldn't actually do it. And she came up, she's like, "Will you help me?" And I was 14, middle of the mosh pit, and my dad's right behind me. So I ended up using that experience just because that was something very personal with me. But obviously my dad said we weren't helping. Buzzkill. Presenting at the Midwest Sociological Society was really cool. I had quite a few people mention they wanted to go to that one. I was incredibly nervous about being nervous, obviously, because this was my first time leaving the country. This was my second time being in such a big city, a lot of new stuff. But the people who came had ended up being people I had already talked to and met and had mentioned that they wanted to come once I said I was doing it. I didn't actually have any nervousness at all. It felt like I was talking to people I'd just recently met, so it was more of a conversation. But after we were all done the presentation, the other two people who presented came up and said they might use some of my findings in their research. I think that definitely stood out the most. It was like, oh, I'm evidence of something. That's crazy. This is my first experience doing research outside of a class final or the paper. And there is a lot more pressure when people ask about things I enjoy or things I'm really proud of I've done. I'll show them papers I've written. But doing this, not having that pressure of, oh, this is just for a grade, this is just for that, it made it really cool. I just thought doing the research was so fun, making these connections on myself, and also then being able to go and talk about it and have people say, oh, you used this person, they're really good, but you should read this instead. I think it really cemented the fact that I want to do something in research. I had obviously prepared the presentation before we got there, but then the evening before I was supposed to present, I was talking with one of Professor Schneider's acquaintances that he had introduced me to. I told him I was presenting. He gave me some advice that kind of redid my whole presentation, which was that they don't care about your paper. They're there for the fun facts within your paper to get them to read your paper, which is really good advice and advice I did follow. And then I got a lot of advice on what kind of things to look for when reading sources. Look at who your sources are using and compare. If two sources you use are using the same people, then obviously that's going to be somewhere more for you to look for. When I told most people this was my first big presentation, they immediately just had all advice. But there was a couple things I found that was just really interesting. One thing I found was goth metal has the most female representation out of any metal genre. 85% of metal artists are male. But the main interesting thing I focused on in my paper was a term I'm using called controlled aggression. Was throughout the paper, the 4 people we interviewed, we asked them general situations they'd been in that could be seen as dangerous. And everybody had situations where they had been harassed or assaulted or they'd seen other people in danger. But then near the end, we asked them, do you think the metal community is safe and inclusive for women and diverse people? And everybody said yes, but then had all these unsafe examples. And so the big thing I took out of it was people seem to be able to say all these very unsafe examples, but then they don't register these people as being part of the community, so the community's safe. You did this bad thing, I don't think you're a metal fan, therefore the community's all safe metal fans. One of the people we interviewed had mentioned mosh pitting, and he said crowd killing and two-stepping and flailing your arms and everything, but you don't go in there to hurt people, which is completely contradictory. You go in there to crowd kill, but you're never trying to harm anyone. That was the main interesting thing I got out of this paper. My biggest advice was, if you're confused about something, just ask whoever you're working with. I've had plenty of questions for Schneider throughout this whole thing because there were a lot of confusions. I had a big gap in learning the sociology stuff, so just having someone I could go to for help who was then giving that help was incredibly useful. I still have to finish the actual paper and then that'll be released. I have learned from this that I'm very interested when it comes to the topic of gender and sexual experiences and such. And I think I'm going to kind of use that to shift where I go in my religious studies and focus on how gender and sexuality have been represented within religion. So I think it'll definitely still influence my academic future, but I don't know if I'll do much more in music itself.